Yeah, they've been incredible leaders for many years and have been carrying the torch for a long time. And it's about time it really takes root in the public. So
that's another reason that I wanted to video, because some of the people are in their 80s, their late 80s.
Yeah,
so I really want to document this because this is important. Well, let's start with where and when you were born and what your astrological sign is.
Sure. So I was born in Greer, South Carolina, which is actually where I am at the moment. And I was born in an East Indian family. So my parents were actually the first Indians to come and settle in Greenville, South Carolina. And now there are thousands of Indian families here. So I was raised in the South. My birthday is the end of January, and I'm an Aquarius, Virgo rising, Taurus moon.
So you have that nice earth to balance your air. That's
Thank goodness. Yeah, I have no water in my chart, which is hard because I actually love the water. So I think it's just I naturally gravitate towards the water to help balance things out.
Do you have family members that have water that you maybe kind of attracted to balance?
Oh, yeah. My husband, he's a Scorpio Libra, and he definitely has water in his chart. My daughter, she's a Cancer. She has water. So absolutely, yeah. And then my son is kind of air and fire like me.
Mm-hmm. Have you taken the Myers-Briggs? Do you know your personality type?
I haven't. I'm embarrassed to say I really don't know.
I'll send you a link. There's an online where you can... The reason I'm asking is that one of the four categories is intuitive or sensing, and my hypothesis is that everyone is going to be intuitive, and so far that's been true. So,
neat.
Yeah, it's kind of curious. So, was that difficult being one of the pioneering Indian families in South Carolina when you were a little girl?
You know, we were really blessed. I mean, my parents, there weren't other Indians, but there were a lot of European immigrants at that time. And actually, I'll just tell you a really quick story. My mom was at a party with, a lot of the immigrants that were there, most of them European, and this Russian woman came up to her. And she said, "You're my daughter." And my mom said, "What?" My mom actually lost her daughter when she was 7. I mean, my mom lost her mom when she was 7. So this woman comes up to her and she's like, "You're my daughter." And my mom's like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "I'm adopting you. You're going to be my daughter." And so it was kind of like that. I mean, everyone was actually super welcoming. And my mom would actually go around and give sari tying lessons to people in the community. And my parents have been really active in the Greenville community, both within the Indian community and the community at large. My dad was president of the Rotary and stuff. So very welcoming, actually, believe it or not. And I grew up with Baptist Christians. So I had a really interesting time because I would go to church with my friends, and of course Baptist Christians, you may be aware, they're a bit stricter. And so, at some point I was at church and, I heard the priest or the preacher say, if you don't believe in Jesus as a Baptist Christian, you're going to hell. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't come to church anymore. I don't want to upset anybody. But at the same time, my friends were really interested in Jainism, which is the spiritual tradition that I grew up in. And they would ask us questions all the time. They'd come over, love to try our food, and ask us, why we believe certain things, why we were vegetarian. So it was actually nice.
Oh, wonderful. I've been to a Jain temple in India. And they took in all kinds of little creatures that had been wounded. It was very kind of sweet humanitarian place. Have you been back and forth to India?
I have. In fact, we just took a delegation of scientists out to India a couple of months ago in November, where we visited several ashrams in the Tamil Nadu, South India side, where we actually collected data. Maybe we'll talk about that. But we collected data in a project that we call the Power of We, which is meant to explore how does meditation not just affect my body and my brain, but how does it affect the field around us, and how does meditating in a group together actually potentially link our biofields. So we studied EEG and we studied EKG, and we're looking for the possibilities of coherence between people, not just within a person. And we also took some measurements of, possible condition space, and we're analyzing that data now. So, yeah, and I have a lot of family in India, so I like to go and visit when I can.
It's good for the kids. I know the Transcendental Meditation people did an experiment, I think, in the Midwest. I'm not sure, where they correlated a whole group meditating with decrease in crime rate. But that's the only study I know that was kind of.
They've done several studies, great work, and yeah, our study really piggybacks on that and tries to extend it by asking a couple of more questions, which is, does this work only for TM Siddhi program, which is what they did? Why? How does that happen? If they showed, over and over that when you had thousands of people who were really well trained in this TM Siddhi program meditating, they were showing these correlations, on and off correlations with things like crime rate, right? And so one of the questions we might have is like, well, how does that even happen? Like, how do we even explain that? Do we see alterations in conditioned space? Can we figure out whether we wire together? Does our global well-being, when we get together and meditate together in groups the way people are doing all over the world now, right? Does that actually have an effect on our well-being? So just trying to put together some of those pieces. And, Maharishi had something, a very specific formula that he used in terms of trying to determine how many people you needed to affect such an outcome like crime rate. But no one's really ever tried to replicate that with something else. So it's really wonderful work that they did, and I feel like there should be many, many, many more studies in this area to explore it further.
What did you? I was thinking also it would be interesting to include random number generators, because they get more coherent in certain circumstances. Kind of in a nutshell, what were your preliminary findings? I'm sure you're still
We don't know yet. We literally just collected the data a couple of months ago, so we're number crunching at the moment, cleaning up the data, cleaning for artifacts and all of that. So I wish I could tell you something, but I really can't. We haven't even started the analysis. We're just doing the processing.
How did you have people hooked up with skin sensitivity measurement, or what were your measurement devices?
Actually, Muse. I don't know if you've heard of Muse. They're a great little company. They have these portable headsets that just measure frontal EEG, so it kind of looks like a headband, and you put it on, and we were able to add an EKG electrode to the Muse headset, and what we did was we just collected that frontal part of the EEG with like 6 people, and we had to synchronize the data. That I don't want to get really boring or whatever, but that's the hard part, is making sure that if you've got 6 people and you're collecting their EEG and you're interested in looking at coherence, you've got to be able to adequately timestamp everything so that you know that you're looking at the brainwaves that are happening exactly at the same point in time. So we did that. We figured out, David Musum, who was the Consciousness and Healing Initiative's research director, figured out a clever way of doing that, kind of low cost, on the ground, because we're in the ashrams, right? I mean, we're not like in a big fancy lab with huge EEG equipment. We had to figure out how to take the study to the field as opposed to bringing people into the lab. So it was really neat.
What kind of meditation? Were there different kinds in different ashrams?
Yep, exactly. There were. We went to one ashram, which I would call a very typical bhakti yoga type of practice. We call it practice. This was the ashram of someone who is known as an avatar, or an incarnation, really, of the main Hindu goddesses. And this person is known as Shri Shakti Narayani Amma. And so it is a man who, is said to be the incarnation of these 3 devis, or goddesses.
Wait, Shakti Amma is a man?
Well, there are a couple of Ammas, right? So you're probably familiar with Amma, or Ammachi, the hugging saint, who has an ashram in Kerala, also in South India. And Amma is a woman, and very well known for her amazing energy and her philanthropy. I actually gave a talk at their ashram a year or 2 ago. Amazing work, amazing person. This Amma is a different Amma, also called Amma, but different, kind of coming from a different tradition. And so this ashram was very much about devotional chanting, chanting to the goddess. They have a beautiful temple that they have built to the goddess Lakshmi, but they revere all the goddesses there. Durga Ma is very present. And all I can tell you is Tamil Nadu is itself, just the land, the people, everything. I mean, the presence of the goddess is so strong there, all over, and, particularly in this temple. So we did some, measurements with the chanting. which is interesting because we couldn't get the priests who were chanting, right, because they're like moving their mouths and that would disrupt the data. So what we did is we got measurements on people who were sitting in the puja room while the chanting was going on. So that was one example. And we also went to Auroville.
Oh, you did? I've been there. When I was there, they were just building it. How exciting.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Amazing place. And we were lucky to really just be given such beautiful treatment by the scientists there as well. And we did some studies using, really exploring the impact of the meditations that they do. And they do several different kinds, actually. So we had some really lovely dialogues. Those are posted on the Chi website as well. Like if people go to our website, it's chi.is, and you'll see a little, on the homepage there, you'll see a little button called the Power of We. And if you click on that, it'll take you to our summary of what we did in India. And it's got a really nice video with one of the teachers in Auroville. His name is Shridalu Ranade, and he actually grew up around the mother. And we have some really great conversations on distant healing, physics, and the cosmology, behind Sri Aurobindo's teachings.
Ma Richard is the French woman, his mother, for them?
Yes.
I still have glued in my mind the picture of her feet that they have featured, I think, in the city. I didn't see them at the temple, but it was really sweet. It felt devotional.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, the Mathura Mandir, where they have this just giant temple that was kind of, the whole place and the whole space of Auroville was downloaded by the mother. But if you have a chance to go and meditate in that temple, it's pretty amazing. So it was a beautiful trip to India that our delegates had because they got to experience a lot of different ways to connect with the divine and explore, scientifically, can we say anything about these conditioned spaces? Because a healer, or a contemplative person can go in and feel the difference in the energy, right? And then the question is, like you said, whether you're using the REG or some of the other measures that we use, is there a way to actually explore and capture that, reliably? And how does it relate to outcomes?
That's a good question. How would you measure the resonance of the space that it?
He used a device called the Sputnik, which is an attachment to Konstantin Kurotkov's machine, which is the latest version is called the BioWell. So you may be familiar with the gaseous discharge visualization technique that Kurotkov pioneered several decades ago. It's gone through many iterations. Essentially, that device, in particular the GDV, as it's called, and now called the BioWell, measures biophotonic emission from the finger, and so that's what it's most known for. But there is another fellow in Russia, whose name is Dmitry, who pioneered a very simple device that they say measures capacitance in the area, so within a room or outside, and it's very, very sensitive to ionic fluctuations. So we use that. It's basically like an antenna. And, is that the best measure? We don't know. This stuff is really exploratory. I haven't seen a ton of studies out there with the Sputnik yet, but we have several scientists in our group, including Beverly Rubik and Tiffany Barsotti and others that have been using this in exploratory research. So we thought we'll give it a try. We explored bringing the random number generator as well, but with these kinds of studies, the designs don't really lend themselves as well because in Arno DeLorme, who's at IONS, and I know you know Institute of Noetic Science as well, Arno has done great work in many of these areas. We had a long discussion about it, and when you're using something like the GDV, you want to have kind of repeatable on-off periods, right? And so that would prove a little bit difficult in this setting where it's like meditate for 2 minutes, don't meditate for 2 minutes, meditate for 2 minutes, don't meditate. Yeah, you can't really do that. So we wanted to go in there with our tools that could capture the essence of what was going on without disrupting the flow of what was going on so much. And that was really important, okay, because we've got, scientists from the U.S. coming to India. These folks have never met us. You can imagine, given the way things generally run, with East Coast relationships and West Coast relationships, or Eastern world relationships and Western world relationships, they were really wondering how arrogant we would be, how much we would impose our thinking and our designs and everything on them. So I love it because there's some great pictures we snapped just sort of candidly And I'll never forget, like, these scenes of, like, the priests at first when we're out there with our little, devices and everything. And, pretty much everyone except for me is Caucasian. There's, like, 2 people of color in our whole group. And, these Indian priests are kind of like, they're just checking us out. They're kind of like, who are these people? Are they for real? Are they devout? Are they spiritual? Are they, what are they trying to discredit us? Like, what are they doing? And so that was kind of it. And then they got to know our group, which, I would describe our group at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative as, groups of scientists and healers and medical doctors and that are really devout in their seeking, both as scientists and as professionals, as well as on their own spiritual path. So they felt that, it didn't take them long to figure that out over there. And so by the end, we've got these pictures of the priests putting on the headsets and, ooh, take a picture of my finger, and, oh, that's really cool, and we're having real dialogue. And so that was the most important part of the trip, really, from my perspective, just opening those doors to collaboration.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Very. I was thinking of William Benston's mice, that it would be interesting to take mice that were injected with breast cancers and keep them in the temple and have a control group in a non-temple situation and see the longevity of the
What
injected.
a beautiful idea. I love that idea. We should talk to Bill about that. I think he'd be game for that.
Well, it's easy too. I mean, you would just have to make sure they had the same food and water and attention. Because we know that's another complication, is the intent of the person who's caring for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That would be that's fairly easy and fairly measurable. This rat lived this many days, and this rat in the non-temple, non-ashram situation lived that many days.
I love it. It's such a great idea. I love it.
I'm sure he'd love it too. What about your family background led you to be a physician?
Well, I was always really deeply interested in consciousness and metaphysics, I guess you could say, because I was a really huge reader when I was a kid. Just loved to read all the time. And so we had all these amazing books, on our bookshelf. Just wild books, things like Easy Journey to Other Planets. Well, what's that? What do you mean Easy Journey to Other Planets? Like, what is this about? So we would have just such a fun time reading some of those books and trying to understand these metaphysical concepts of the soul and of karma and of consciousness and yoga, and why did alternate nostril breathing actually affect the sympathetic nervous system, and how did they know that was true? So it just kind of set afire, really, my curiosity for all of these things. And then growing up in the Western world and in school, realizing that we didn't talk about spirituality. We didn't talk about the intersection of spirituality with health. At that time, growing up in the 80s, people didn't even really know about psychoneuroimmunology. It was just beginning. And of course, that ended up being the field of study that I pursued for my Ph.D., psychoneuroimmunology and clinical psychology. So I think it was just being raised in, an East Indian spiritual tradition and having that juxtaposed with our modern education system that really set me on the path, because there's this huge gaping hole, right, of understanding the effects of consciousness on our healing. It wasn't even talked about,
Well, then how did you get to undergrad and graduate school in California from South Carolina?
Well, I went to Columbia University for my undergraduate studies in New York, and I studied neuroscience and behavior, which was literally my senior year. They announced the major, and I had the bright idea of deciding to switch my major from psychology, where I was already kind of studying cognitive neuroscience. I was working with a professor looking at event-related potentials in the brain, and we were studying memory. I was just trying to get research experience, but I was always really fascinated with healing, and so started learning about this field called neuroscience and realized that the neuroscience and behavior major would mean that I had to dissect a lot of animal brains, which I didn't want to do. I was decidedly anti-pre-med, much to the chagrin of my parents, because every Indian wants their kid to be a doctor. I took 5 biology classes my senior year, which was likely a mistake, and graduated with that degree, but then started, really thinking about, okay, how do these practices, how does vibration affect us all the way down to the physical level. Not like it's just the physical level, but there's clearly a connection. And this will give you an idea of where people were at the time, okay? So now we're in the 90s, right? Early to mid-90s. And they're saying there's no plasticity in the brain after age 7. And I'm graduating, and I'm sitting with my, undergraduate mentor, who's just a wonderful guy, great guy, loved him, and we're just having lunch, he's congratulating me on my graduation and everything, and he said, I just don't understand why people are still studying things like skin conductance and heart rate. I mean, we've got the brain, and I was thinking, wow, but this is an interconnected system. Why is it that you have to study just the brain and all of a sudden heart rate isn't important? Like, how does that make any sense? So eventually I found my way to finding mentors who understood approaching the study of healing from a systems-based level. And my first mentor was actually Gary Schwartz, who I think you interviewed for the book.
Yes.
Gary Schwartz and Iris Bell, amazing mentors, so supportive in so many ways. But I really wanted to be clinical, and that wasn't possible under Gary's lab at the time. So I took up my deferment at UCSD, San Diego State, and joined doctoral program in clinical psychology, and started work with Paul Mills in psychoneuroimmunology and learned how to use those approaches to study healing. And that was really the focus of my work at UCSD.
And then I've forgotten if you have an MD rather than a Ph.D., right?
Actually a Ph.D.
Ph.D. Okay. And then it's probably good to define psychoneuroimmunology for the listeners and readers. I associate it with Candace Pert and ligands and cell receptors. Why don't you define it for us?
Yeah, I mean, I say that it's a very fancy term, and the truth is if you can say it 10 times really fast, you get your degree. Try it. It's not easy. No, it's the study of how the mind, really the spirit, if you think about what psyche actually, the origins of the word psyche, it's really spirit, right? Psychoneuroimmunology then really is studying the effects of the psyche, the spirit, the emotions, the mind on the nervous system, the neuro part, and the immune system. And of course there is also the endocrine system. So some people say PNI for psychoneuroimmunology. Some people will say PNIE for psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. Now try saying that 10 times really fast.
Can't do it.
Just say it's a fancy term for understanding how our spirits, minds, and emotions affect our health and affect our bodies. We're studying the interactions between these systems, really.
Mm-hmm. Before we go more into your work, I think it's interesting for people to know what the difficult times of your life have been and how you coped, because I'm interviewing only bright, successful people, so I want people to know that everybody has challenges.
I actually think this one might be really important and hopefully will be different for the newer generation. So one thing I noticed coming into the field is, first of all, it was really hard initially to find mentors and programs that supported, these questions and these perspectives. What does consciousness have to do with healing? How can I study things like Reiki or, other energy medicine things? And I still get emails from people all the time asking me these questions. We don't have really solid answers for them, in terms of looking for these opportunities in academia. You really have to dig. So that was difficult initially finding folks. And then what I realized is the folks that I did meet who were pioneers in this field, they had chips on their shoulders. And, you can say rightfully so, because they'd just been badgered and battered, for studying what they wanted to study. And I noticed that a lot of the ones that were in really, high positions at universities were scared to talk about their work. Or they didn't feel like they had community. And I remember very clearly, actually, presenting my data, which is, funded by the National Institutes of Health, published in the journal Cancer, a very well-respected journal for oncologists, highly read. And one of the pioneers in psychoneuroimmunology sat me down at this meeting. It was a PNIRS meeting, Psychoneuroimmunology Research Society meeting, and I had been selected as, one of the more promising presentations or whatever. So, here I'm supposed to be giving this data blitz on my findings, which I was really excited about, right? On healing, So groundbreaking, exciting stuff, and I was really excited to open up, all these scientists in this area. And this leader in psychoneuroimmunology sits me down and he says, you've got to stop. People are not ready for what you're doing. You're going to ruin your career if you do this. And I was just about to go into my postdoc at UCLA. And I just thought, wow, if my service was to be in academia, then I totally get what you're saying. If my goal was to get tenure and be an academic professor and, be highly respected by everybody, then I totally get what you're saying. But my service is to the work. It's to follow, a path that I feel like is going to help elevate humanity and understand our purpose and our potential. And why should science not be a part of that? Why should we be afraid to ask those kinds of questions? So that was a difficult transition point for me because I'm, going into UCLA, one of the best centers for psychoneuroimmunology there, working with very prestigious professors. And, in the end, it wasn't a good fit. I stayed there for a year. Of course, my family was in San Diego, so I either had to move the whole family up to, UCLA or, think of a different option. And I just had to trust. So I would say when we come up with these sorts of challenges, and this is just one, there's so many different examples of challenges we can face in our careers or personal life or whatever. What I have found to be really helpful is just to trust.
Trust your intuitive knowing.
It's to trust guidance. It's to trust God. It's to trust spirit, to trust your soul, whatever, you feel like your soul's calling. It's just to give in to that higher purpose and know that it's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's not about your career. It's not about whether you're famous. It's not about whether you make money. It's about your service and your allegiance to, what it is that you're wanting to bring out to the world. And if you stay with that in a non-attached way, everything works out. As it turned out, right when I realized I was going to have to not continue my postdoc at UCLA after being there for a year, it was kind of like they said, well, you either need to move and move the family, because I was commuting, right? You need to move and move the family, or else, you're not going to be able to stay here. And I had 2 very young kids. My husband had a job in San Diego, and I didn't have anything lined up, and I also knew that it wasn't easy to find places and opportunities to do work in energy medicine. But I just gave up and trusted. I said, well, I've got to release this. This is clearly not the right path. So I'm going to leave UCLA and trust that something happened. And it was hard. I cried. And I think 2 or 3 days later, I got an offer to be a senior scientist with Samueli Institute, who had funded my previous research study. Just like that, completely out of the blue. And not only that, they, being based in Washington, D.C., actually said, we think it would actually be useful for you to stay and keep your position at UCSD, because I had just, enrolled for a faculty position there. And you can do your work from afar. Be with your family and, and do your work in energy medicine and work with us remotely.
Well, who funds the Samueli Institute?
They have actually now closed down. But at that time, they were around. And a couple of years ago, they closed shop, Samueli Institute. They were based in Alexandria, Virginia, and they were funded by Henry and Susan Samueli. Henry was the co-founder of Broadcom, big company. And they've done a lot of different wonderful things in integrative medicine. So the Samuelis have now donated, I can't remember if it's $100 million or $200 million, to UC Irvine for, essentially a giant center with integrative medicine approaches.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. So you have some really forward-thinking, smart people with capacity who understand that this is the future of medicine and understand the role of consciousness in our healing process. And so, part of our role is to make sure that the work that we're doing is really strong, solid, and we share it, right? And we align with people like that so that they can help us scale the research, because that's really, and the education, both are important.
Was it difficult being in grad school and having little children?
You know what's funny is one of my colleagues, actually one of my classmates, told me that I apparently had this all planned out. I don't remember this at all. Okay, but he said that when I came into grad school, I said that I was going to get married and have kids when I was in grad school. I really don't remember ever saying that. That's what happened. In my case, because I had my own grant, it was very unusual in my doctoral program. Most people didn't even do their own studies, run their own studies. They would just get a data set from, their mentors, because their mentors are running these giant studies, and they would take a part of the data set, they would analyze it for their dissertation and be on their way. In my case, because I was so passionate about researching energy medicine, I applied for a grant and got funding from the National Institutes of Health, as well as at that time Samueli Institute, to conduct a study on hands-on healing for fatigue in cancer survivors. And so since I had my own funding and I was still working part-time, it wasn't a problem. Yeah, it took longer, but it was super rewarding on all sides. Yeah.
Once you get past the sleepless nights, I think that's the hardest part, is when the baby's waking you up every 3 hours or whatever.
Yeah, that is hard. It's funny because after my kids got a little bit older, everyone all of a sudden looked at me and said, "You look younger." And I was like, because I'm sleeping. I'm sleeping again. It's amazing.
Absolutely. I remember I'd be teaching after I had a baby, and the student would ask me a question. There would be this little time lag before a thought would come into my brain because I was so sleep deprived. Everything was kind of on hold in a way. On
I was on internship, and I'd have to try to sneak out in these 50, I was seeing patients at the La Jolla VA hospital when my second was born, and that was a little hard for me because I only had about 3 months with him before I had to go back to work, and it was a very 9-to-5 kind of situation.
Oh.
And at first he wasn't feeding, with the bottle, and, that was really hard. But I was pumping, every couple of hours, so it was... I just remember just sitting there sleep deprived, needing to be there for my patients.
Yeah.
And, and then come home and, of course, be there for your kids. So you definitely have to have a lot of energy.
Yeah.
Eat well, that's important.
I want to hear about your research with cancer patients, but I just wanted to interject that I'm still having trouble with a university that does really cutting edge research. They're afraid to talk to me for this book. So I keep trying and trying and trying. So it's still a problem of academics are fearful.
Are you okay telling me who it is?
Let me tell you when I'm not recording.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, I'd be happy to see if I can help.
Okay, great. So you did find results with hands-on healers, with Reiki and Jo Ray and whatever modalities that the cancer patients did have better outcomes, correct?
So here's what we actually did. We addressed the issue of cancer-related fatigue. So we took breast cancer survivors who were experiencing debilitating amounts of fatigue. You probably already know it's the number one complaint for cancer patients and survivors. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of survivors, even when they're done with cancer treatment, are just so wiped out they can't engage. Their quality of life is poor. They can't engage in self-care activities like exercise or even meditation sometimes because they're just wiped out. So I went to my healing teacher, Reverend Rosalind Bruyere, and I said, if you were going to work with fatigue breast cancer survivors, what would you do? And she said, I'd do chelation. So for those who don't know, chelation is a hands-on, healing practice, which is incorporated now in Healing Touch and very similar practice in Reiki and others, where you simply place your hands on the body and stimulate the vital energy, and you work from the feet all the way up to draw out potential toxicities and to stimulate the bone marrow chi. That's how Rosalind would describe it. So we did that. We did a randomized placebo-controlled trial. The study is published in the journal Cancer. I think it was published in 2011. And, it was 3 arms of a randomized control trial with our, quote, sham scientists who were skeptical of energy healing, but, didn't practice yoga, meditation, healing, anything like that. We trained them in the hand positions. All the sessions were in silence. And I was really interested in all these, quote, placebo elements and whether they could explain results. So besides just having the sham arm, we actually had patients after they received a session, whether it was with the healer or with, our, quote, mock healer. We had each patient rate after each time How friendly did they feel like their practitioner was? How connected did they feel to their practitioner? How much did they feel like this treatment was helping them? And oh, by the way, did they feel like it was hands-on healing or touch alone? Because both are shown to have beneficial effects. So we really set up the study like that, to sort of keep expectations about the same. What we found was that those who actually received the real hands-on healing, you can say by trained healers who had been trained for many years on working with patients using this, dropped to levels of fatigue that you'd expect for a regular person walking down the street. That is normative levels of fatigue within a month. We're talking 8 treatments. So not only statistically significant, but highly clinically significant. And just for the healing group, we found that their cortisol rhythms improved throughout the day. So one of the things that the literature has reported with fatigued breast cancer survivors is that it's not just that your cortisol is high or too low, but it's the rhythm of cortisol throughout the day that gets altered. Oh. And one study has actually found that the rhythm of cortisol throughout the day is altered so much in breast cancer patients that it's associated with death. That's at least in one study.
Is that because of the effects of chemo?
We don't know. That's really the answer. I think that people are wondering whether it's related to chemo, whether it's related to radiation, whether it's related to surgery, whether it's related to stress, whether it's related to all of the above. Okay, but one thing that we know is that fatigued and depressed breast cancer survivors have these abnormal rhythms of cortisol throughout the day. So normally when you wake up, your cortisol would peak at about 30 minutes and then kind of taper off through the day. And, in these women's case, it doesn't happen like that. It could be totally dysregular, it could be flat, it could be too high, it could be too low, it could be a lot of things. What we found is that for those survivors that got healing, their cortisol rhythms normalized. They had more variability throughout the day, meaning that the slopes of change were more regular. And so we felt like that, was an important outcome in the study. And I put in every placebo variable I could to try to explain away those results. I put in clinical variables like chemotherapy status, body mass index, all kinds of things to see if those explained it. They didn't. So it would be great to replicate that study, with hundreds of patients. We had about 80 or 90 total. So it was a small study.
Did the patients who had the untrained healers have better outcomes than patients who didn't have any hands-on?
Yes. So those who went and just simply came twice a week every day, laid down on the table, were touched by a caring person, reported that they felt friendly, they felt connected. Their fatigue levels dropped too, significantly. Not as much as the ones with the healing, who got the actual healing, but notably, they dropped to levels of what you would expect a breast cancer patient to experience right before they went to chemotherapy. So less than they had before, significantly less.
And was there a correlation with feeling friendly, connected? Did they have better outcomes than the unfriendly?
We didn't see that. No, interestingly. But what we did want to make sure of, though, is that both groups had kind of the same ratings of friendliness and connection. So it turned out whether you saw a real healer or whether you saw a sham healer, you found them equally as friendly and connected and felt like they were helping with treatment. So that was important, right? Because those things could be explaining outcomes otherwise.
Oh, yeah. But that's strange that I can't imagine that all the healers were perceived as friendly, because some people have different personality types.
Would think, yeah. I think the differences between the groups, there weren't any significant differences between the groups on friendliness and connection. But here's another thing we did find, which is super important, because as you know, quality of life is a huge, important indicator in cancer, right? Sometimes quality of life actually predicts mortality in certain kinds of cancer patients. We found that if you believed you were receiving healing, your quality of life was more likely to improve. So whether you were seeing an actual healer or not an actual healer, if you believed that you were getting benefit from the treatment that you were getting, and of course at that time they didn't know, right? If you believed that you were receiving healing, your quality of life would improve.
So that's placebo.
That is what we currently call placebo. That is part of what we currently call the placebo effect, which we probably don't have time to go into it. I have a whole talk that I've given on placebo and understanding placebo from a consciousness-based point of view. it's a super important finding because it suggests that if you believe in the treatment you're getting, you're more likely to get a positive effect. And so you might even ask, why don't pharmaceutical studies do this? Why don't they actually ask patients whether they think the drugs they're taking help them or not? Maybe it would actually be an early indicator of whether they would help them or not.
What I think is fascinating is I've read that people who are told this is a placebo, but they're given a big red pill, they even though they know it's a sugar pill, they have better outcomes.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. The work of Kapchuk and colleagues over at Harvard, they were doing some wonderful work. They just got a huge grant to study this more in depth with a large group of patients, and they've shown this for fatigue, they've shown it for pain, and they've shown it for IBS. It's amazing. So placebos do not have to mean that you are duped, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be tricked into believing something.
Well, can you give us a nutshell of your talk on placebo? Because placebo is so important in terms of the power of mind.
Sure. So I say placebo really equals heal. Placebo equals holistic elements that activate life force. Now, most of my scientific colleagues will not like the term life force. So you could say holistic elements that activate salutogenesis, or the process of healing, right? Because if you think about what we're learning with placebo, and we just talked about this perfect example, right, the open label placebo study, the old models of understanding placebo are based on a materialist or a physicalist framework that suggests that placebo is an inert substance that has no effect. But placebo is a mind-body-spirit phenomenon. So if you approach placebo from a consciousness-based point of view, you can actually deliver better medicine. Because what are the elements that we know, that comprise what we call placebo? It's presence, right? It's your own presence, and it's the presence of the provider with you. It's the interaction. There was just another recent study published by researchers at Stanford University looking at the effects of positive therapeutic interaction with a doctor and a patient on outcomes, immune outcomes. Okay, there's so many studies like that. So it's interaction, right, which also stems from consciousness. Presence stems from consciousness, how connected you are to your inner self, to God consciousness, or, your divine consciousness, if you can say. There's the interaction effect that I mentioned. There's ritual, and if you think about what ritual is, we talk about rituals in medicine, whether you're wearing the white coat or whether you're seeing a Reiki healer. What are you doing with ritual? You're setting stage to open consciousness to the healing. So whether you're setting the stage to do prayer and connect with the divine that way, or whether you're setting the stage to open your belief patterns that the medicine, the agent that you're deciding is the active agent in this, which is really your own consciousness, right, works. You're creating a whole ritual. So you're calming the nervous system. You are opening your consciousness level so that you can foster healing on a deeper level, right? So there's that. So if you start with a consciousness-based framework, you start with presence. You expand to therapeutic interaction, you understand the basis of ritual, and you can consciously create rituals to foster your own healing, which is done in pretty much every healing tradition that I know of worldwide. Right? That's what ancient medicine practices have been doing forever, and still apply to modern medicine. And then you deal with the waking consciousness aspects of expectation and conditioning, right? Which is how does my body generally feel when I go to the doctor's office? Or how does my body generally feel when I lay on the massage table? That's your body-mind already being conditioned to what they had before. And then you get to the level of consciousness and conscious expectation, which is what are my thoughts and my waking beliefs around this medicine that I'm taking, right? So, but materialist-based viewpoints kind of do it backwards, right? They start with the mental, they start with the cognitive, they start with expectation as everything, and they kind of neglect all these other consciousness-based aspects of placebo that are driving the effects, like interactions, therapeutic interactions. Is that really at the level of medicine? Well, yes, it is. What's the substrate there? It's the interaction, it's the mind, it's the consciousness, it's the emotion. It's all of that. It's not a physical pill.
You better define consciousness for us, because this is a consciousness revolution we're talking about, the new paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah, define consciousness in one sentence. It means different things to different people, right? So if you ask me how I personally view consciousness, then I would say it is the source and substrate of creation, right? It is beyond mind. It's beyond emotion. It's beyond the physical. It's what gives rise to the physical. So in Eastern tradition, this is, kind of the basis of our cosmology. So it's definitely, considered in the West a more spiritual interpretation, and many argue that it's not a scientific one. But then you have all these terms like panpsychism and others, where they're essentially saying very similar things.
Some people are even suggesting that when an electron decides to jump this way and at this time, that's kind of consciousness, that's kind of free will. So you could take it way down to the quantum level, I guess.
Yeah, you can. You can. And in at least in Jain metaphysics, when we talk about the nature of the soul, which the soul, part of the soul is considered to be pure consciousness. It is a non-physical substance. It is considered a non-physical, so not even just a subtle substance, but a non-physical substance. So.
And do you believe that stays with us after material death of the body?
I'm a Jain by my spiritual background, so if you ask me personally, then I would say yes. And if you ask me scientifically, I would say that we need to do more studies like the studies that are being done at Department of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, at the University of Virginia, where Jim Tucker and others are studying the possibilities of reincarnation. Not an easy thing to study, but he does, as you might know, provide some provocative evidence for things like reincarnation, which would suggest that there's the existence of something beyond the physical body after death.
Yeah, they've done over 2,000 children who remember their past lives. So that's, what can you say about that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you found that there's emotional patterns? Is it too simplistic to say that the body illness is kind of a metaphor and breast cancer would be lack of self-nurturance? Have you found any kind of emotional patterns?
I always shy away from black and white thinking in anything. So I'm not a fan of someone making blanket statements that every breast cancer patient doesn't express emotion or whatever. Yeah, and I know a lot of psychologists do that. There's a whole discussion that some folks have on type D personalities as personality traits that comprise a breast cancer patient, for example. I don't agree with that. What I've seen in my clinical practice, as well as from the research, is that there are all kinds of people, and we all have different types of stressors and ways of dealing with them. So we may see certain patterns that emerge with certain patient populations, no doubt. Depression is anger turned inward. What happens to the body when we turn anger inward? To think that there wouldn't be an effect of turning anger inward all the time, if that's your propensity, yeah, there's likely going to be some, inflammatory response there, or some kind of a, inflammation of the body in some way, possibly, right? Even that's a conjecture, honestly. We don't have, mounds and mounds of evidence, quite honestly, to say that with certainty, right? But there's enough there to ask yourself, well, we certainly know the mind-body connection is there. We certainly know that emotions affect the immune system. So what I encourage people to do is, not try to look for blanket statements, but just go within, to really go within your own body and notice what happens when you process emotion. I think the more that we can really tune into what's happening in our own bodies when we experience sadness, depression, happiness, joy, contentment, the more we'll know how to regulate our own health. And then, of course, as we start doing that more on the subtle level, we get more and more skilled on it.
Tell us about your book that's coming out in 2020.
The book will be on the biofield. title is still being bantied about, so we'll see what the title ends up being next year. You will find out. But it will be all about the evolutions that we're seeing in science, the exciting evolutions that we're seeing in science that integrate non-materialist with materialist perspectives, and particularly the biofield, this field of energy and information that guide our health. What do we know about it? What does the research say? And how do we understand it in a way that we can foster healing for ourselves and others?
Is it kind of a metaphysical word for biofield, aura?
Well, some people would say that the aura is part of the biofield, but we wouldn't just call it the aura necessarily. The truth is we're just, from a science point of view, beginning to understand the nature of what we call the little b biofield. So you can talk about the biofield of a cell or the biofield of the earth, right? So if you want to say the aura of the cell or the aura of the earth, you could, but even what we think of as the aura isn't really well understood. Because if you ask, for example, a Jan Nun what she thinks of the aura, and you ask a spiritualist what they think of the aura, they may give you different answers.
But you can do Kirlian photographs of the energy field. I mean, you can see it.
Yeah, I mean, the Kirlian photographs, the thing that I was telling you about with the gaseous discharge visualization technique is really measuring biophoton emission from the finger. I mean, that's actually what the data are giving you. Now, how that's interpreted and all that, that's a whole other question, right?
Is the implication of your work with the biofield that when healing occurs, it happens by integrating or in some ways energizing or doing something with the biofield?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah. Is the implication that the biofield is that which is acted upon in a healing process? So if you're doing Reiki or Jo-Ray or whatever you have hands on, are you impacting the energy field?
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. It's a fancy term. Biofield is a fancy term that Western scientists coined at an NIH meeting about 2 decades ago now. And it includes these concepts of prana, elan vital, chi, subtle energy, but also includes bioelectromagnetics. So it includes both what we consider measurable right now and immeasurable right now. And maybe one day the immeasurable will become measurable, and maybe it won't. But all of these things are said to play a role in healing, and they all involve the description of energy and information, right? That can either be felt, sensed, understood by a healer. So absolutely, when we study the biofield, we talk about practices like Reiki and Jo-Ray and healing touch as being biofield therapies. That's the term that we use. Don't know if it's the best term or the right term, but that's the term that's in vogue these days with scientists.
And then you talk about neuromodulation that besides doing hands-on work with the biofield, you can use electromagnetic currents like Harry Oldfield's electrocrystal machine or something like that, I presume. Or
there are these more subtle ones, like the ones that you mentioned, the Rife machine types of devices. There's lots of subtle energy devices, and then there are ones that aren't even subtle, meaning that they put in a very specific frequency. They can measure it. They can measure what comes out. So pulsed electromagnetic field stimulation, for example, is a very popular, type of bioelectromagnetic or biofield device. That is said to foster healing, and there's some studies suggesting it's useful for pain and wound healing and others. And then, there are some that we would call biofield devices that include transcranial magnetic stimulation, because you're using electricity and magnetism to generate changes in the biofield of a person. And that is, supposedly going to lend itself to healing. But is TMS at all anything like Reiki? Most Reiki healers would probably say no, right? So, I don't know if we can really lump them together except to say that they are working with the body's energy field to provide a healing response.
Mm-hmm. Have you personally been trained in the biofield therapies, like you worked with Rosalind Briere? So I'm assuming that you did.
Right. Yeah, I'm enrolled in the Crucible program with her. I've learned from her for many years. I consider her a mentor. And before I met her, I was initiated into Reiki levels 1 and 2. So I practiced Reiki a bit, and now, if somebody asks me what I practice when I lay my hands on a person, I don't really know what to say. I would say that it's probably more of what I've learned from Rosalind, because that seems to be what really comes through. So, but I also, at times say specific mantras that I've learned too when I do healing. So,
what's your favorite book of Briere's that explains her healing approach?
Well, the only one that I'm aware of that is published is called Wheels of Light. And it's all on the first chakra. And it's amazing. Very in-depth. Yeah, I highly recommend it to anybody.
Yeah.
She still teaches, too, by the way. She's still teaching. Yeah.
She practices what she preaches, obviously.
She does.
One of the things that I do when I'm doing like a phone session with someone is read their chakras, and I'm wondering, and then we balance them, and I'm wondering what you think, what mechanism allows, like, is it the quantum information field, non-locality, what allows us to do distant healing work?
It's funny because I'm not sure that we still have a really solid, understood explanation in physics, Western physics, for explaining how distant scanning and distant healing can work. And, again, if you go to our website and go to the Power of We page, we have that really nice video with Shraddhalu Ranade on this very topic, where we talk about how does this work. And he does a really nice job of explaining some of the cosmological frameworks from Vedic points of view that would help us to understand how distant healing works, for example. So there are, descriptions of the different types of subtle energy bodies, some that can travel, and that could be a potential explanation based on, on those frameworks. They're not really well described out in the West. I don't think a lot of people in the West understand the level of description of some of these subtle bodies that exist in the Vedic literature and the Jain literature and other indigenous cultures. So there are frameworks out there. From the Western point of view, we're still exploring, I think. I don't know that we know the answer. I think everyone's very excited about quantum physics. I won't pretend to be a physicist. I'll say, the little that I know and understand about it, I'm not sure if that's the answer. There's also the de Broglie-Bohm theory, which is a very interesting theory that is quite different from the reigning views in quantum physics. And that might be a very interesting place to look.
Summarize that for us.
What's that?
De Broglie-Bohm, how would you summarize that theory?
I won't. I'm not going to try. I'm going to be honest with you but I will refer you to my colleague and biophysicist, Dr. David Musum, who is Chief Innovation Director and Research Director, and he could give you a really nice summary of the de Broglie-Bohm theory and his thoughts about whether it explained distant healing.
Okay,
but
great.
I wouldn't call myself an expert in that at all.
You started Consciousness and Healing Initiative, CHI, or Chi, how do you say it? Tell us a little bit about what the goal is there.
Absolutely, Gail. Well, to start, we were talking about what obstacles have you faced, and I mentioned that, I was coming across all of these different scientists who had trouble publishing their research in these frontier areas of energy medicine and biofield science, who didn't feel like they had community, who didn't have the funding to forward the work. And I said, wow, this is crazy. This work is so important for humanity. This work is so important for science and medicine. We have to provide a platform and a gathering space for people to learn from each other, to support each other, and to support the work. And that's really where Chi was born. It was born, from a gathering of scientists where we got together and talked about what we knew in the field of biofield science and healing. That was in late 2014. And one of the outcomes of that meeting was, let's start this collaborative. So we call Chi a collaborative. It's not an institute. It's not another organization. It's not another society at this point. It is a meeting place. It is a place for engaging in collective alchemy to foster a deeper understanding of healing and its effects on humanity. So we bring together scientists, we bring together educators, we bring together healers, we bring together medical professionals and artists to all bring their wisdom to the table in understanding how healing works. And we do things like, scientific publications, of course. We published a special issue in Biofield Science and Healing, which was published with Global Advances in Health and Medicine. It's freely available by signing up as a subscriber free on our website. You'll get access to 13 articles that kind of lay out, where we are with biofield science. We also do public gatherings. So we're doing a whole pre-conference with Institute of Noetic Sciences on July 18th of this year. And the theme is, I Don't End Here, Biofield Science and Healing. So we're going to be exploring all the ways that we don't end here, both with, practices with healers, including Lissa Rankin, who I think you know, Rosalind will be there, Eileen McCusick, other healers, as well as, top-notch scientists like Larry Dossi, Dean Radin, Richard Hammerschlag, many others, who will be Beverly Rubik, who will be, kind of giving us a lay of the land on what the research is saying in these areas of distant intention, connections with the earth, grounding, collective consciousness, all these areas.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be amazing, actually.
Will the proceedings be published, do you think?
Yeah, we're talking about maybe doing a paper as a result of that meeting on the 18th. But it's really meant for people to connect, engage, get informed, but also, really bring it into our bodies, bring it into practice.
I love it. You've mentioned in your articles some other institutions. I want to have a resource list in the back of the book. UC San Diego's Center for Integrative Medicine, is that still happening?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. UC San Diego Center for Integrative Medicine is thriving, and they also have a Center for Mindfulness. They are very open to, these perspectives on healing and consciousness, so they're a great resource.
Was there a person that was crucial in organizing that?
There's several, actually. But on the research side, one of the research leaders there is Dr. Paul Mills, who I did my training with and is a lovely human being. We actually just did a wonderful webinar with him. That's another thing I should mention that she does is on the education side, we have this great conference coming up on the 18th, but every month, on the first Friday of every month, we hold webinars on healing. And so we just did one last Friday with Paul Mills on some of the research that he and Laura Redwine conducted on gratitude in heart failure and the effects of gratitude on our immune system and our heart health. So Paul's a great resource.
A Green Heart International, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, Green Heart is great. They are an organization that, among many things, they foster cultural exchange, and they also lead an annual conference at this point called the Purpose Summit, and that's actually held in the Bay Area. They usually hold it in the fall. So they're a very mission-aligned organization.
What would you say their focus is? What are they interested in?
They're interested in purpose, peace, and cultural understanding.
So it's kind of an international harmony thing.
Yeah, they do a lot of cultural exchange work.
Another one I'd never heard of, MIRAGLO Foundation, Miraglo.
The Miraglo Foundation is a foundation that was started by Rowney King and Mimi Guarneri. Rowney King is very well known in the healing touch field. So she is a healing touch, certified healing touch practitioner and teacher. And a big proponent of the biofield. Mimi Guarneri is a leader in integrative medicine. She's an integrative cardiologist and also a deeply spiritual human being. So that is their foundation.
Wow. And then the Chopra Foundation, you worked with Deepak, yeah?
Yes, yeah. As you can imagine, they're very, very open to all of this.
Yeah. And have I left out places that you look to for research or centers of thought in terms of the biofield and the new paradigm?
I would say there are many emerging centers and groups at universities that are coming up that are deeply interested in the biofield. I mean, one group that has been, biofield focused for some time, and there's a researcher doing great work there is at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Christina Ross has been doing some great work in bioelectromagnetics there. There's several other biofield researchers at, places like the University of Iowa and MD Anderson Cancer Center and other places.
Wow, that's exciting. So where are you headed in terms of your future goals? It's the book, working on Qi. Do you still see individual patients, or where do you want to take the next step?
I think the primary focus is really to empower the field in a big way, which means what we're about to engage in, we hope, for this year is really doing a systems-wide assessment to help answer some of these questions that you're asking and others are asking, which is, where are all the centers? Who are all the researchers? Where are all the healers? What does the research really say at this point, and what are the best next steps for research? How can we gather the necessary resources and people to fund this work on a large level at multiple institutions with multiple researchers and multiple healers so that it really scales? And then how do we distill down what we know in education for the public, for medical professionals for sure, right? We all, pretty much agree on that, right? And there are groups doing that, like the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine has within their fellowship program focus on biofield, which is great, and they love it. The folks taking the fellowship love it. So, we need more efforts like that, and we need more efforts to educate the public on, what is this area of the biofield, and how do I tap into it and use it for my health? So currently, Qi is dialoguing with some friends who I think will be able to help us do this on a large level in the way that it really needs to be done, so that we can really bring together the best and brightest minds and train, the new upcoming budding researchers to have a thriving field that's going to help elevate consciousness and healing on this planet.
That's really exciting. How exciting.
That's what's next, is really to do this, so that we're not just doing our little pet projects everywhere, but we're synergizing. That's really what needs to happen.
Got it. What do you do for fun in the face of this important pioneering work? What's fun?
Well, when I was in San Diego, I surfed a lot, which I loved, and I sang a lot, which I love. And I still sing, although I don't have any active bands here in Greenville yet, because I have to dedicate more time to my book, and it takes time to put a band together. So eventually that will happen. But I sing around the house and stuff for fun. It's my lifeblood, so I love it. And, I don't have an ocean here, but I've got beautiful trees. So I'm in nature any chance that I can get. I find it really, really healing, and always reminds me that God has much bigger plans than I do.
Do you want to sing anything for us?
At the moment? No, but if you, I've actually done a little prayer at the end of an interview with Gaia TV that people can go to if they want to check it out, and it's our Jan prayer for healing. So, I could do that sometime, but at the moment I'm not feeling called to it, if that's okay.
Okay. The last question is, in the face of climate weirdness, climate change, maybe 12 years to turn things around, the rise of autocrats, are you optimistic or pessimistic about our future as human beings?
I'm both. Sometimes I think about the world that I've brought my kids into, and it's hard when I think about it from that perspective. On the other hand, then I listen to them, and I think, wow, they're totally dialed in. I mean, they're so clear, and they see the issues, and, we adults now have to face our issues. I mean, when we've got 15-year-olds that are leading climate change, actions the way they are now.
I love her, the Swedish.
It's amazing, right? And she's so clear. And everyone says this about the new generations. They're clear. Well, yeah, they are. But I actually have a lot of hope, because I think that the work that all of us are doing here to raise consciousness and understand the depths of our potential, right, to elevate healing for ourselves and others is going to make a huge difference in things like climate change, because it's only by understanding who we are as conscious beings that we can make better choices, so that we're not enslaved to the conditioning that, has really mired humanity for so long by greedy forces. So, and the children aren't having it, right? Because things are coming to a head now so badly that it can't be ignored. It just cannot be ignored.
I have to tell you this. I told my grandson, who's 8, that I interviewed a Nobel Prize winner in physics. And I said, Soren, what's physics? He says, oh, it's a study of anomalies in space-time. And he's 8.
Love it. Exactly. See, so they're so bright. They're so bright.
And he understood what that meant.
Yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah.
if anybody can understand. Is there anything that you would like to be included in this discussion that we haven't touched on?
Gosh, Gail, I feel like we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, I'm thinking about it and thinking. No, I feel pretty complete.
Okay.